want to say that's worth pointing out before we start is the benefit of doing one like this is that it's not YouTube. So, I've done talks on WSL on YouTube, yada, 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 but that's a one-way thing. So if anyone has a question, put it in the Zoom chat. I put that over on a separate monitor to make sure that I'm watching that. It makes it more fun and more interesting if you're asking questions because it makes it a different talk and not a YouTube. So please do interrupt. And if it's a very important interruption, unmute yourself and say bullshit or whatever you need to say because I did something wrong. That would be helpful as well. Is that cool? And Dan, you can. And if you see a good question go by, like you can interrupt on their behalf as well.
Sounds good. I
find that helpful, actually. It gives me more energy. Otherwise, you're just talking to yourself, alone in your room, which is weird. Okay, so we can see my terminal, yeah?
Yes.
All right, cool. Oh, and if you know all this stuff also, like if I'm going through this and you're like, this is all 101 nonsense, then interrupt as well. I just want to make sure that you are edutained because you've been so thoughtful and flexible with my schedule. My calendar schedule is absolutely bananas right now. Like that's my calendar. And it's just, I'm playing Tetris with my calendar right now. And it seems like quarantine work is way harder than remote work. Has anyone else noticed that lately? Remote work was easy. I've been remote working for 13 years. This is a totally different thing. It's very stressful. I'm working way harder and I'm enjoying myself somewhat less. Although I talked to someone yesterday and I said the same thing. I proposed, hey, this sucks and I hate quarantine work. Although of course the US sucks more than the UK right now, but we all kind of suck. I said, have you been hating quarantine work? And she said, no, I just discovered that my lifestyle has a name and it's called quarantine. Nothing has changed. She never went out before and she still doesn't go out. So nothing changed except for the wearing a mask part. Cool. All right. So let's talk about this. I always find this discussion about consoles to be interesting. So before we talk about WSL, I think it's important to talk about the Windows terminal because I see a lot of people making statements that are imprecise. So when you go to the start menu and you go and type in CMD and you get this lovely thing, this is super old and it sucks. And it's not really DOS, but it's kind of DOS-y. It's DOS-like. So I kind of call it DOS, but not DOS, right? It runs batch files, but it's not really DOS. The thing that is taking my keyboard input and returning strings is command.exe. That is different from the thing that is drawing this dialog box here. Hi, friend. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Can you close the door? Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. He has to make me lunch twice a week. It's not like I have him like on call for lunches. I'm just saying. We want to teach the kids how to make lunch. Okay. The thing that drew this window here is console host. So if I go and I run PowerShell, we'll bring this over here. That shares this dialog box. Okay. And if I run, what's another one? What's another shell we've got over here? Let's just run bash.exe. If I run bash.exe, it looks like I get a similar thing. So it's important to point out that that's a shell, that's a shell, that's a shell, totally different shells, exact same thing that did the painting. Super important. A shell is not a terminal. Savvy? Now, if we go, say, to my desktop, and I do this, let's make some log spew. So there's some logs. Do you know, if you're super old like me, that if you make this smaller, your stuff actually goes faster? This is one of the dirty little secrets about, yeah, Matt is nodding his head and sad about that he knows that. So we would do like a build in .NET. By the way, you've got some people waiting in the waiting room. I don't know what you want to do about that, Dan. So that is painting synchronously to the screen. So the shell is outputting strings as fast as it can, but the console host is not clever enough to skip frames. Yeah, Quack is saying if you minimize it, it goes even faster. Yes, that is the fastest thing you can do is nothing. And we learned that very long time ago. That's one of the things. It's not command.exe's problem. It's not PowerShell's fault. It is the fault of the console host that is doing this painting. Now, a couple of years ago when Windows 10 came out, things like control scroll, I'm using control scroll right now, is nice. By the way, if you don't want to look at 50 people, you can click the ... on me and click pin or spotlight video. It's up to you. I like seeing all the happy faces, but if you can set whatever you want to see yourself. So control scroll is a thing. You may remember when we got the ability, which was a wonderful day, to put true type fonts in here. For the longest time, we didn't have that. But now if I go and run, let's say, git bash, which comes with git, and this is where people start conflating stuff, and they'll say, well, you know, I can type in ls, and that's cool, so that's Linux, right? Well, there's two things that are interesting here. First, git bash, which ships with git, is not using the Windows console host. It's got its own thing. You can see this dialog box is something we've never seen before. And that means that the thing that painted this title bar and did the painting on the screen is not the console host. And there are other examples. Another one is Cygwin, which is also bashy-like. And if I click on that and I hit options, look at that. That's interesting. So here's git bash, here's Cygwin. They look suspiciously similar. But there's two things here. First, who's doing the painting? And then who is doing the command management here? So someone created these tools here as basically a vote of no confidence. min-tty, this little terminal is a vote of no confidence against the original Windows console host, which is 30 years old and sucks. So we acknowledge that. But I can go and run within here other things. So now I'm running command.exe under min-tty. So I'm trying to juxtapose that a shell can run under any terminal and vice versa. I also want to point out that this is Linuxy, and it has things like awk and sed and stuff like that. And probably vi, maybe. Yeah, there you go. But it's not Linux. What it is it is Win32 recompiled user mode binaries that are talking to Windows. So when I go ls, in this case here, probably not going anywhere. Let's go over to the right folder. I think they make a C drive in here. There you go. Users, Scott, desktop. Oops, have you crashed, Cygwin? Oh, bless you. All right, well, Cygwin is losing its mind here. Let's try again. All right, when I did ls, the thing that spun through the files was not a Linux system call. It was a Windows Win32 call, because this ls actually exists somewhere. I think we can actually go and find it. Look at that. That is the literal location of ls. Now, ls isn't built into the shell. It's not a magic command like dir. There's no dir.exe. In Linux world, everything's a process, everything's an executable. So ls.exe exists in that folder, which means if I go into that folder, put that in my clipboard, hop over there, look what I'm going to find. All the Linuxy things, including this disturbingly named executable. All of these different things are recompiled for Linux. They make you feel comfortable because it's the things that you're used to using, but they aren't Linux. Cool. So now we know that there's user mode GNU utilities. That's a thing. We know that there's multiple kinds of shells, and we know that there's multiple kinds of console/terminals that are responsible for the actual painting. So let's talk about responsible for painting. Notice here, these glyphs look like trash. The colors are wrong, but also they're a big question mark. Let me zoom in on this one. Can't really see this one here. It's kind of low contrast, but you get the idea. Clearly, I'm missing some glyphs there. There's also an inability to draw what are called ligatures. So I'm not getting any automatic ligature drawing here. That's because this is console host and it's super old. Fast forward to now, where I'm going to go to the start menu and I'm going to type WT for Windows Terminal. And we'll bring up the new yummy Linux Windows Terminal. And if you're not using the Windows Terminal, get on board. There's literally no reason not to use it. Now, some people might say, oh, well, I use a third-party terminal already. I'm already a big fan of Console Z, Console 2, ConEmu, Terminus, Hyper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole ecosystem of third-party terminals, and that's awesome. Use the one that makes you happy. Dan is saying he uses Commander and ComEmu, but now has switched to Terminal. It's not a competition, but the thing that's important to note is that previous to the creation of the Windows Terminal, how did ConEmu work? Well, God help us all, it brought a secret window up and you type dir in ConEmu and it would repeat it. It would screen scrape the strings and redraw them. So it would make an invisible window and then minimize it, and then it made one and it hid it, and it was all a whole thing. That's because console host sucks. So what they did is they created a thing called conpty. And conpty is a pseudo console. It is the Windows pseudo console, blah, 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 history, and it provides this intermediate place between the shell and the terminal, talks about exactly how it works, and allows you to have things like VT parsers, the renderer, how the actual string goes standard in and standard out versus the display renderer. It's really, really clean. What's nice about this and what's super important about this is that a third-party console app can do this. So if you like ConEmu or you like Commander, cool. Keep using it. They can talk to these conpty APIs and they get the benefits of all these things. So Windows Terminal did not come to destroy all third-party terminals. It just happens to sit on the thing that makes them all possible and better. And there you go. That's cool. Keith Williams is saying his dev team refuses to believe that Git on Windows is possible without Git bash. Well, that's just silly. That's just a silly thing to say. I hope your team is on the call here so that they know I've called them silly. I think the issue is that it's hard to figure all these things out, right? How do you determine all of these things? This is a challenge. So reading the docs, going to user groups and figuring them out is the best thing that I can offer. But let's look at the terminal. Oh, actually, now there's a question about ligatures, and now you're going to make me go and Google for how to turn on ligatures. Windows terminal ligatures.
No, it's on. Like, I just noticed a weird thing. Like, I just did what you did and put --arrow in my Windows terminal. It's just got Cascadia Code PL installed and ligatures on. But if I put it in quotes now, I'll get the ligature. But see there, it's not done a ligature, but just put it in quote and you do.
Oh.
I've never noticed that before.
There must be a reason. Let's find out. There must be a reason. Why would that be? Why would that be? What is the security reason? Let's ask Kayla. I'm going to chat Kayla, who owns the Windows terminal. Let's see what she says. 1 second.
Getting different results. So like if I do like equals arrow, that's fine. That I get the ligature straight away, but like dash dash arrow, no, doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Dash arrow no equals arrow yes. Yeah.
All right, we'll see what she says. Good question. Cool.
That's all right. I missed that about working at Microsoft. I used to long time
What's
ago.
that?
Just ask the person that wrote
Or being able to just ask anybody.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So a couple things there. First, we've talked about some stuff without talking about stuff. First, ligatures. Ligatures are very controversial. Marriages have broken up over this stuff. This is like tabs versus spaces level stuff. If you go like that, 3 equals sign. People think that's either the greatest thing since God talked to Moses or kill it with fire. Equals, equals, equals. Equals, equals, greater than. Or the ever controversial WWW. Isn't that lovely? Pretty scary stuff. Notice that it goes away when it's selecting. And then when it can be fully selected, it stays there. You just want your brain to explode. There's rules for all this stuff. I like it. I think it's fun. I think that one's a good one. That one I have mixed feelings about. But you can turn it off, so it doesn't matter. James says that not using them is wrong, so that's now a new interview question at their work there. Okay, cool. So use whatever makes you happy. I'm in PowerShell right now, and I'm in PowerShell core, and you'll note that I've got these lovely glyphs. So these things that were question marks are in fact glyphs that were brought in from nerd fonts. They're called Powerline glyphs. And what's yummy about them is that if I go over to here, I'm going to use Z, which is faster than CD. You want to get Z, which is the greatest thing ever. You can go over here and search for Hanselman Z CD, and I do a whole thing called spend less time CDing around and use Z instead. What's nice about Z is it remembers where you were, and then it just takes you back there. It has basically a stack of stuff. It's different than popd and pushd, but if I want to go somewhere quickly on any folder, I can get there. Isn't that great? Way better. Now, notice that I'm now on the source code for my podcast. Within that, I've got my branch name, 2 files that I've added. I'm on a dirty branch, nothing modified and nothing deleted, which is lovely. And then you might notice what's going on over here. This is my blood sugar in MGDL, not MMOL. Sorry, British people. So that's me seeing my blood sugar in real time because I have an implant. It goes to the cloud, and then I have a REST API. And then I have a background process that's running, that's updating a text file. And then I read the text file from the prompt, and I see my blood sugar in real time at the same time as I see my Git stuff. That's the level of like configurability that one can do when they're living the dream inside of the prompt here. Dan is saying you can go like that. Ooh. Oh, Dan. What? That works in PowerShell too?
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in PowerShell.
It does. I'm doing it in PowerShell right now.
Was it? Oh,
you're watching me in PowerShell doing it right now.
No, I thought you were in Bash. Let me have a go.
No, man, I'm in PowerShell. I'm in Posh.
Now you've made my day too.
Sweet Lord. Hang on. This is a new thing I never knew about. What does that even mean? What is life? I had no idea. I thought I knew everything, Dan. In fact, you know everything. How would you even Google for that? What? Switches between the old and new present working directories. Is it a stack?
I think it's just a flip.
I don't feel like I'm flipping over here. I'm not. See? That's 3 different directories.
I just get a horrendous.
No,
error
it's
when I
navigate
type.
backwards in history.
So there's a CD plus as well.
What?
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
This talk was worth the price of entry.
Tip your waiters. Thank you, Dan. See, this is why we do user groups, my friends. This is why this is not YouTube. I had absolutely no idea, shocked and amazed. I will pay you back, Dan, by showing you this. So you know you're in DOS and you're doing your thing and you're messing about, and you hit F7. And then you get that. F7, introduced in DOS 4.0. One of the greatest features of Windows. I always tell people it was introduced in Windows 10 just to make the young people feel included. Cool. Mark is saying the behavior is different in Windows and Linux. Well, it wouldn't be Windows if the behavior wasn't different, would it? Okay, so let's prove that. So Mark is saying that when you switch between, it flips between last and current. I love it. So let's do that. See, that's unfortunate because now I have to have my folders be nice. I don't know. I kind of like the other one. Interesting. And then James is saying F8 is the magic. Oh, isn't that just the same as going up?
No, well, if you start to type something, it will also complete all of the things that match that start with that out of your history. So if you did like dot now and pressed it, you'd get that .NET reference line, like DOT. Yeah, anything you've done it will match.
Oh,
and just keep.
I would
pressing the
rather
same.
do. I would rather do this, which is Control R. So the problem is F8 only works at the beginning. Like if I type reference and I hit F8, nothing happens because F8 completes what was already there and then cycles through things that are prefixed with that.
Yeah.
But if I do Control R.
Yeah, you win.
No, I'm not trying to win. It's not a competition.
It's always a competition.
Is it always a competition? I don't think so. That's what inclusion is about, not making it a competition. See my t-shirt?
Yeah.
All right, cool. What are we talking about? Oh yes, Linux. Cool. Yes, this is wonderful. Thank you. Niels Johansson is saying sharing shortcuts. It's what it's all about. CD plus and minus, absolute game changer. Just wonderful. Did not know that. Lovely. Okay, so you can see that I've been using the terminal and I've been running around and I've got a nice blinged out menu here I can pop down, which is cool. I can press F11 to go full screen, which is just scrumptious. And what's nice about that is that if you decide to go and do Windows tab, another great shortcut that isn't used enough, not Alt tab, but Windows tab, you can then put on another virtual desktop a full screen terminal. And then if you've got a laptop, you can use a 4-finger swipe, which Mac people have been using for years, and now Windows people can as well. So you have your main system, 4-finger swipe over to your other desktop with a full screen version of the terminal, which looks great. And then you can also do this. I'm hitting Control Shift Scroll, and I'm now making my desktop transparent, or my terminal rather transparent, which has good things and bad things about it. If you want to see stuff. but I can change how transparent it is. Yeah, Jose is saying you can change that, or is that Joseph? I'm seeing it cut off. That's Joseph. Is saying that you can go and rename your virtual desktops as well, which is absolutely true. Cool. Okay. So git bash is not bash. Let's talk about Linux. So if we go and say WSL --list-v, make sure that I don't forget my next meeting is not for another hour. Good. If I say WSL --list-v, you can see that I've got 6 Linuxes installed, 7, but 5 that I can use. Docker Desktop and Docker Desktop Data we'll talk about a little bit later. You can see that Ubuntu 18.04 is my default because it has a little star by it. Some of them are version 1, some of them are version 2. Cool. So let's do this. Let's say WSL-D for distro, Kali Linux. I'm going to go and fire that up. And then I'll say, I gotta run htop. So now I'm running htop on Kali Linux on WSL1. I want you to note, by the way, how quickly I'm moving around. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm not waiting for anything to start up. It all starts up instantly. Let's look at the task manager now. And let's go find what's going on here. I see some Windows Subsystem for Linux, little small things here. Launcher. And I see SSD. Where's, what did I run? htop? Where are you, htop? Oh, you're sorted wrong. There's bash. There's htop. Look at this. This is interesting. htop has a Windows PID process ID. That's odd. Remember how I made a big deal a minute ago about how that's not a good idea with Cygwin. With Cygwin, we are actually running bash.exe, which is a Windows Win32 executable recompiled on Windows for Windows. It's Linuxy, not Linux. Here, htop is an actual ELF binary. It's a real Linux binary, except when it fired up, we gave it a Windows PID. Well, one of the things that's interesting about Linux is Linux, it's cheap to make processes. Linux is always making processes. Like forking 2 processes, no big deal. It's like that. Windows processes are historically heavy. There's a Windows process usually includes the expectation that it will have a window. Linux can fork processes in a loop and do stuff really, really quickly. On Windows, you're going to spend 10, 20 times more time with the setup and the copying of the environment and all the stuff that goes along with it, all the administrative nonsense. Now, that said, in order to make Linux work with WSL1 and make things like this fire up, like if I fired up VI, I'll be able to go to the task manager. I'll actually find an instance of VI. What is happening is they made a thing called a Pico process. It's a special kind of Windows process that doesn't have all those things, and that's how it starts up so fast. But this is still Linux up until what point? Well, remember before when I said that Cygwin, so I always forget how to, let's get out of here. There you go. When you go like this and you say ls, where am I? Oh, I'm inside of Kali Linux. Sorry, it took me a second to figure out where I was. When I type ls, that's the Linux ls, making a Linux system call and expecting to enumerate files on disk. If I do this in Cygwin, it just calls whatever the Windows file open thing that's inside of kernel 32. Here, it's actually saying Linux system call, give me the list there. Windows then intercepts that with WSL1, and it has a map of all of the Linux system calls, and then it maps them and translates it, thunks over to Windows. It's the inverse of wine. If you've ever used wine on Linux, it lets you kind of low-key run Windows apps on Linux. This is letting you run Linux apps on Windows by thunking over into Linux system calls into Windows system calls. That's interesting because it lets you run Linux without a Linux kernel, which is super cool and amazing and worked for a while and everyone loved it until you actually need a Linux kernel. You need compatibility. So you're sacrificing compatibility for this feature here where the Linux process and the Windows process appear in the same list. WSL 1 has value because it allows you to do things like talk to the serial port. Because you're a Windows process, you're just a Linux process packaged up into like a little envelope. So I can talk to the serial port. So I can write blog posts about WSL 1, like I just did. There we go. Connect to a device over serial COM port on Windows 10. So I basically made in Windows Terminal a launch directly into the COM port and talk to my Arduino on port COM4 in one click by using Minicom. I'm running Linux stuff, but I'm talking to the Windows Device Manager. Isn't that cool? There's a reason for WSL1 to exist. However, when you are, by the way, additionally, because you're talking to Windows, if I go over here, Mount C, and I'm on the Windows file system, because I'm kind of a Windows process, the file system access on WSL1 to the Windows file system is fast. Very fast.
You won't even get the context.
Somebody talking? Or are you talking to yourself or are you talking to me?
I've just muted him.
All right, cool. I think Tom's having a crisis over there. All right. If I go to the Linux file system and I go and do something, WSL1, the kids are going to bed. Now I feel bad. I made you all stay late. WSL1 to the Linux file system is slow. Why is that slow? It's slow because WSL1 has to talk to the Windows file system and then talk to the Linux file system. So it's a file system within a file system. And that gives you this kind of order n slowness. So if you are using WSL1 and you're talking to the Linux file system, you're doing something like node or npm install, it's going to suck bad. It's going to be almost unusable. So if you're using WSL1, talk to the Windows file system, full stop, period. Everything else is going to suck. Now, if I go back out here and I do my -- list -v, oops, -- list -v, it's hard to type when everyone's looking. And then we go and we just run bash or WSL. It's going to launch the default, which is Ubuntu. That does not look right. WSL, let me see where I'm at. Oh, I guess that's where I was last. All right. Cool. So now I'm in Ubuntu and I'm on WSL 2. Now we look at Task Manager. And we see that there is a thing called VM-mem sitting right here. Now, right now it's using about 2 gigs. Let's get out of here and let's say WSL/shutdown. Is it shutdown? Dash shutdown? Pretty sure that's what it is.
You did stuff down.
What's that?
You got a typo.
You typed stuff down.
Oh, I meant to do that. There we go. Thank you. Okay, cool. So that's gone. Down to nothing. I think it would have popped back up because I'm running the Docker desktop. So it'll disappear and then it'll come right back. Okay, so now it's gone. WSL 1000, 1000. 2 seconds to start up. This is really important. This is where we juxtapose the difference between a virtual machine. If I open up Hyper-V Manager on my system here, you see that there are no virtual machines. There's not even invisible ones. That's because it was really important that we be able to run WSL on Windows Home. Windows Pro costs money, more money. It's not what the kids get when they go to school. So if you're a university student and you picked up a $300 laptop, you want to be able to do WSL. But Microsoft doesn't want you to have Hyper-V. So what you get is if you go into turn Windows features on and off, which is where you turn this stuff on, I want to juxtapose the difference between this, which is on Pro, and these, which are on Home. So it's a layered stack. So if you're running this on Home, you'll get all the same features, you just don't get the ability to run the Hyper-V manager. This is a lightweight virtual machine that starts up like poof. Yeah, by the way, Tom Lane is thankful that this came to Home. There was a lot of work, surprisingly large, a lot amount of work. Dan is saying he had VMM hit a lot of memory. That could have been an earlier version, but it's worth pointing out that there is a memory reclamation, and there was a whole discussion about this. There's a new feature. We can see that the memory will get big, but then it will now get cleaned up. And if you want, you can force compacting of memory with a single command. If you're finding that that's happening a lot or that it's not happening fast enough, you can do that. Even better though, you can go and set up a WSL config file and put in a memory limit. There you go. So you can put in exactly the maximum amount of memory that you want, which is cool. All right. So back over here, our VMM, it looks like about 500 megs since I restarted it. Usually when I'm doing real work, it stays under a gig, maybe sometimes 2. I would say that an 8 gigabyte machine that you were using for development would be somewhat challenging. Possible, but challenging. Okay. Timothy is asking about the X410 app in the MS Store. Future versions of WSL2 will let you run Linux applications graphically, but you can do that today if you want to by just exporting a X server and using the X410 app in the Microsoft Store, and you can go and run Linux apps and just have an X server. Totally works just fine. Works great. That's my recommended one. Okay, Ticklu is saying, where does the Linux file system live? Well, that is a complicated question. First, on WSL1, the Linux file system is actually the Windows file system, which is why it's so slow and weird. And it's actually buried in like app data somewhere in the beast, and don't ever go in there because you'll break it. WSL1 was not clever about if you edited the file system outside of Linux, it would get confused because someone's changing the file and no one told it. You could really booger it up. WSL2, the Linux file system, is hidden inside of a VHD. That's cool and actually makes the perf really, really fast because it's not thinking about NTFS, it's just doing ext4. And it's all buried in there. And what's the thing? Is it FT, EF? There you go. These are mounted down here. And this stuff is all managed with a VHD. Okay? And it's super fast. So WSL2 is super fast on the Linux file system. So when I have my source code, I want to do all of that stuff on the Linux file system. But if I go over to here, that's mounted as an external file system, it's going to cost me. Now, there was a question earlier. Thank you, DF-H. There you go. Cool. Thank you, Mark. Now, if I am on the Linux file system, let's say I go into a folder with some, a .NET application, and I say, let's say notepad.exe and open up programs.cs. I'm asking Linux, can you run this Windows executable? The Windows folder, mount C Windows System 32 is in the path. I can't say notepad, because that's not a Linux command. If I say notepad.exe, the Linux kernel tries to run it, sees that it's not a Linux app, and gives up. But because we're running our own Linux kernel, an actual real one that we've got all the source code to, we can capture that failure and then tell Windows to run the executable. So you can run Windows executables from Linux. It just leaps out. It's passed on to Windows. Notice that I can change. See this here? It says Windows CRLF. Let's go back in here. Let's see if we have a bash. Do we have a bash? Bash RC? Okay, here's my bash RC. Okay. Notepad bash rc.exe. Notepad was updated a couple years ago to support line feeds, which is cool. So how are we able to talk to this file system? Well, if we say explorer.exe this was not possible before, because you needed a way to change the file system and let Ubuntu know that it changed. Otherwise, you'd corrupt things real fast. But what's happening is they're running a Plan 9 server, and you're now talking to a network share. But it's a local network, and it's fast. You see how Ubuntu shows up right there. Now, watch this. Let's put this over this and this over this. And now let's go ahead and run a couple of other Linuxes. These are all running, which means I can now copy files between Linuxes just by opening things up in Explorer. This is really important. We as engineers, in my opinion, have a tendency to say just a lot. We do it to explain to ourselves why things work, how they work, and we say, oh, I see, Microsoft, you've just technical explanation. And in doing that, we minimize the work of a dozen people over 2 years to reconfigure the Windows kernel. Oh yeah, this is just a virtual machine. It's a little bit more than that. Oh, this is just right? What's the goal here? The goal is not to just run Linux on Windows. It's to include Linux and Windows in a way that is so integrated that you're moving between them smoothly, quickly, easily. File system access in both places. Being able to run Windows executables from Linux and vice versa. So, for example, I'm in Linux right now at the command line. Let's go back over to, which one is this? Okay, so this one is Ubuntu, okay? My folder, ls pipe clip.exe, the Windows clipboard. So now, if I run Notepad, I just pasted in the result of ls. So then I could go and pipe and pipe and pipe and pipe, right? You can do whatever makes you happy. Now, if I'm on PowerShell, I can say WSL -- help, and I can execute stuff. I think, and someone who may know this more than I do will remind me, but I believe I could do things like dir, pipe it through WSL or bash, and then run grep. I forget how to do this. There you go. I'm not sure why that one didn't work. You see what we just did here? We ran a Windows command, piped it through that, and then I could go and pipe it again, right? And now I could pipe it through a PowerShell-ism. Now you might say, why? And I would say, why not? Right? Whatever makes you happy. That's the new Microsoft, whatever makes you happy. You'll notice that if I go back over to my podcast website, which was over here, I've actually got PS1 files. And in those PS1 files is a shebang, which makes it run on Linux, and then an extension which makes it run on Windows. So my builds and my tests are using PowerShell. I don't use PowerShell as a shell in Linux, I use Bash, but I do use PowerShell as a scripting language in Bash to orchestrate my builds. So that's cool. Now, oops, oh crap. Oh man, okay, so I just pressed some hotkey because I'm moving too fast. What happened to my screen? This is called retro mode. It's literally gone and made a retro feature in the terminal. I don't remember what the hotkey is, and now I've boogered it up. But the new Windows terminal, Control-Shift-R, James knows everything. There'll be a talk next week where James World is going to go and explain this stuff because this is brilliant. So you gave me the code, Control-Shift-R, he says. Control-Shift-R is not helping me. It's making an R here. But I'm going to try something else. If I go Control-Shift-P, WSL is eating it. I'm not in WSL. I am in PowerShell Core. You can unmute yourself if you want to help me get out of this, but I'll show you how I'm going to try. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P and I'm going to drop.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So it works on my machine, Control-Shift.
It works on my machine. That's super helpful. All right. I just hit Control-Shift-P because I've got a newer version of the terminal. And I now have a palette like you're familiar with Control-Shift-P in Windows and Visual Studio Code, which is nice. Ah, look at that. So for some reason on my system, retro mode is mapped to Control-D. I don't know why anyone thought that was a good idea. Maybe I did at some point. But what's cool about this is a couple things, twofold. First, you see the command prompt here. First, I can go like this. I can hit enter and turn it off. And in doing that, I learned the mapped feature because this thing automatically changes stuff. Not neat? Good stuff. Dan is pointing out that Control-Shift-F as well is nice. You can actually do find in your terminal backwards, which is a killer feature. I think we can all agree that that is pretty sweet. Yep. Now, James is pointing out, of course, as well, those features that I'm seeing, that information about where my key bindings are coming from. They're coming from down in here. So you can see the custom key bindings that you've made, and then I'm seeing them reflected here. One of the key bindings that I was able to set up as well, keeping in mind that I'm using PowerShell, not Bash, is the ability to do split screen. So now I've got PowerShell on the left and PowerShell again on the right. Lots of features there where you could go and split, an auto split horizontally, vertically, whatever you want to do. This is not tmux. It's in the terminal itself. Now tmux works fine, but you can do that if you want. So that's pretty sweet. We've also added recently the ability to color and rename tabs. I'm sure that pants means something offensive in the UK. Every time I say something, it's offensive in the UK. Trousers, I don't know, whatever. Cool. See, now y'all have got such good tips. Now I've completely forgotten what I was talking about. Oh, the philosophy of WSL, of what is the point here? It's to see what I'm doing. You're watching me move seamlessly from shell to shell, from place to place, in and out of file systems, just naturally. Now, as any developer does, you have to be conscious of your carriage returns and your line feeds and things like that. You'll have to note that I've got .NET as an example installed here in Windows, and a different .NET or not. Oh, this is Ubuntu 20.04. My .NET is installed in 18.04. Different version. So I got to be thoughtful about those things. Now, if we return over here, see if Docker's working today. So it says Docker could not be found in this WSL distro. Okay. So what we can do, see if this works. You can go in here and turn on Docker for the distribution that you want. James is saying, go and get a tiny monitor just to run Windows Terminal on it. The irony of that, I don't know how old you are, James World, but do you remember Hercules monitors? So back in the day, kids, you would take a Hercules monitor. This is the way people did you'd say mode mono. This is how people did dual monitors back in the day. You would get a Hercules graphics card, which was this big. Now you know how old I am, old. And you would run your color display, and then you'd have a tiny little 11-inch monitor that was Hercules. It was an amber monitors. It was a mono amber monitor. And you would go to the DOS prompt. There it is. It looked like that. And you type mode mono. And because of the way video memory was organized, the color part was up here and the mono part was down here, and you just be at the DOS prompt, and you just jump. And then suddenly you'd find yourself on the other monitor. So we'd run our builds and stuff over on the other monitor. And that was like dual monitor. And we thought we were just the greatest people ever. And now with all the power that we have, you're suggesting that we do the same thing again, which is awesome. Just have a tiny, tiny monitor underneath our desks that runs Windows Terminal, which I love. Cool. All right. So Docker Desktop for Windows has the ability now to go and say WSL-list-v. You see how it stopped right here? It runs a Linux distribution of its own and uses it. Yeah, it's running now. I just ran Docker Desktop. It uses it to manage all of my Docker containers. What's cool about that is I have one Docker context, system-wide, computer-wide. So Docker images on Windows gives me Docker images. And Docker images. I don't know why that's not working. This has never happened before. Try it again. Docker images. There you go. I have to figure out why that's coming up there. I'll figure that in a second. Here's the same Docker images. Anyone have any guesses why this is happening? I go settings and look at my Ubuntu 18.0 whatever. I'm probably doing something too clever for my own good. I'm not setting a starting directory. That's not a volume mount. I think it's something like starting directory is not set. I keep ending up where somebody thinks it was the last place. That's a weird one. I've never seen that before. Let's take a look at that. Windows Terminal, starting directory, Ubuntu. Try that. That's weird. Weird. 1804. It is fast, isn't it? Now I want to find out. I'm angry. Why is this happening? Oh, dash. There we go. Try that. There you go. Cool. Makes sense? Still don't know why it was going there, but it's nice to know that it can go somewhere else. Cool. So Docker is Docker is Docker is Docker, which is cool. Now what this means is then I can start doing damage like this. Let's say that I was in, hey, let's do this. We'll do one with WSL remote and we'll do another one with Docker. So let's open up this website. And we saw that I could go explorer.exe dot. And there's the code. I can say code dot, and code is actually, what in the French hell is going on? That is not going to work probably. This is a bigger issue here, which is why, how do you export the path? How do you see the path in Linux? Because that can't work. How is that working? No, not this. I want to see what's in my path. I want to know why it's saying which code. It's saying the one here. This makes sense. The Docker shadowing mount, somehow my Docker is, so here's the deal. If you go over to Windows, you go WSL-list-v. This is Docker, where Docker holds its stuff. That's doing volume mounting for that. But this here are the mounts that are hidden from us, but somehow that seems to have been in the path. Let's see what Mark says. Echo path. What? My path is totally corrupt. How does that get in there? Let's go back over to here. Sorry, Vim and Emacs people, not a fan. Nothing Dockery in there. Isn't there another one that's like, something go wrong integrating Docker into your image while it was running? That's a very thoughtful thing. Let's try this. I will shut down Docker. Wait a moment. There you go. Then I will WSL terminate, or shut down rather. Then I will run Docker. Docker's spinning up. Then I will run Ubuntu. Yeah, so that path is getting set somewhere else. That smells like the kind of thing where I'm not the only person on the planet who's having that issue. August 22nd, that's last week. Initial location is broken after starting Docker Edge. Huh? Isn't it lovely when you Google for the error and you're not alone? It's not just me. This did not occur for me after installing. I'm having the exact same issue. Oh my God. Do not, oh my goodness, this is hilarious. Holy smokes, don't remove that. It will destroy everything. Yes, please don't do that. Look at that. Simply restarting Docker with WSL2 integration breaks it. WSL restart, proper location. Docker desktop, broken location. Okay, so that gets to James's point that maybe it has to do with starting one versus the other. Yeah, that is worrying. So that is this, and are they the same? No. And this, and then I will go to Twitter, and I will talk to Simon. Oops. Oop. This gentleman is lovely. He's probably waking up. Cool. So that's a weird thing, and it looks like it's not a huge deal. Let's see if it's probably going to booger some stuff up, but let's give it a try anyway. Just a path thing. So let's try code again. I'm firing up code in the current folder. Hope you didn't mind that little sidebar there. I think it's interesting. Tells you how the sausage gets made. Notice down here in the corner, VS Code knows that it's running under WSL. What happened was it split in half, and the client side of Visual Studio Code is running here. This is all running in Windows. This is all Windows. The server side was installed. So now I would assume if I went over here and I hit HTOP, oops, first I learned that my colors are goofy. I need to work on that. Well, you're gonna have to deal with my bad colors. If you can see, isn't that awful? I apologize. How can I make this right? I can't get this text. Ah. Can you kind of see this here? It says VS Code server. It's a process that is running that says VS Code server. VS Code has remoted the language services such that if I come in here and I type something and I hit dot, that pop down message, that pop down happens on the server side. So I am talking to Linux right now. When I do the build occurs in Linux. We are a dumb terminal now. VS Code is a dumb terminal. Well, we're a wicked smart terminal. The way that you really look at it to get it in your head is if you look at your extensions, you see how I have 35 installed local extensions? I have 4 extensions that are running here on the server side. We have true location transparency of extensions. Let's look at a more powerful way to express this. Now, this might fail because of that weird Docker error, but it might actually be amazing. Let's go over to my D drive, assuming this works. Here's Go. I do not have Go on this computer. Doesn't even exist, never installed it. If I say code dot, and I open up this folder on Windows, here's Go, and it's going to pop up and say, well, I want to install Go, and I don't have Go. And it says, wait a second, this folder has a dev container. Reopen in container. Again, this may fail given the state of our current situation. It's now building a Docker image from scratch, one time, with that Docker dev container, installing Go, compiling everything it needs to. It happens one time. Then it will install the VS Code server inside the container, forward the port. You see this is black and white right now. Almost done. Happens once. Imagine that I could give anyone here that folder, whether they have Go or PHP or Python installed or not. They just open it and it's done. It is that concept, the remote, there you go, download VS Code server, just fired up. Okay. So now, it says dev container right here. No extensions yet. Okay. This is all happening in Docker, which is happening under WSL 2. Go is installed in the container, and the Go extension lives only in the container. And now this path here is the container with volume mapping. So now I can go in here, open up that Go file, hit HTTP dot, and that pop down was populated by the Go SDK running in the container. The compile happens in the container. The running happens in the container. I can hit F5 and run it, and it'll listen on port 9000. And then I could go and look at localhost 9000 in Windows and talk to my Go stuff. And now I've hit a breakpoint. So now in Windows, running Edge, which is Chrome, hitting localhost 9000, I hit a breakpoint inside of a Go container running in WSL. Turn off the breakpoint, hit run again. There you go. Isn't that cool? So you've heard about code spaces. It is this technology which is as simple as now put that in the cloud. James is saying it's cool for playing with beta stuff and keeping your machine clean. Another way of looking at it is, welcome to the company. It's Monday. Here's a Word document. Go ahead and get your machine set up. And then in 2 weeks, you can start writing code. Versus this, which is, hey, clone this repo and open it. Everything that you need will be downloaded automatically and set up because the dev container right here indicates the extensions that you need, the settings for our company, and a Docker file that sets up your machine exactly the way that you want it. And then any extension can be optionally installed into the container. Or the container could be in the cloud, which means that you could potentially do all of this work on a Surface Go for all I care. Isn't that cool? Questions? James is saying they use it for React and Angular. Yep, it solves a lot of angst. It is like the film Inception, which is all about if you run a virtual machine inside another virtual machine, time slows down. That was the plot of the film Inception. Yes, WSL2 was retrofitted. I'm running it on this laptop on a beta on Windows 1909. I'm not sure it went back to 1903, but yeah, I think maybe it did go back that far. It went back a year and a half. Works just fine. So we're going to make that work everywhere. Dev container is a VS Code thing, yes. Doesn't need to be a VS Code thing, but it is a VS Code thing. That was invented by Amanda Silver, I believe. See if Simon is awake. Nope, just people on this call. Ooh, and the VP of engineering at Docker saying they know about it. Awkward. Cool. Thoughts, questions, comments as I get ready for my next meeting and we end this one. Such a quiet room, thoughtful. Not seeing the usual green backgrounds for directories. Yeah, I'm probably doing a bunch of LS color stuff. So if you're asking why my colors are goofy, there's a couple of issues. First, there's the colors that I set for in my color theme. So I come down here and I made a color scheme called Ubuntu Legit. and I manually went in and changed all these colors just to make them the way I wanted them. And then I also went into, I think it was my Bash RC. And I boogered around force color prompt, color auto, stir colors. I did all that crap. And it sounds like I made a mistake somewhere in there. Oh, one other thing to point out, when I load VS Code and it's in this context, super important, I can go open file, and that's the Linux file system. Well, if I say show local, that's the Windows file system. Robert is asking if you can install Windows Server. You can install Windows Terminal on Windows Server 2012. I do not know, but we can find out. I will say, though, that is an 8-year-old operating system, so no hard feelings if it doesn't work. That said, I'm sure you will find people who have built it, because there's Windows Terminal, there's WinGet, there's Chocolatey, there's Scoop, lots of different ways to get the thing. I don't know. Windows Terminal, Windows Server 22. You know what I would think would be a smarter thing to do would be to SSH into your Windows machine from Windows Terminal. So you would be using Windows Terminal to SSH into a Windows machine, or use PowerShell remoting. So you'd be doing the work not from the server, you'd be doing it from elsewhere. I've been doing SSH lately, so I added this feature, and now I installed, this is built into Windows now for almost 3 years, Open SSH Server, and now you can control what shell opens up when you SSH in. So now I set PowerShell as my default shell in my registry. So when I SSH from anywhere in my house into Ironheart, which is this computer here, then I get PowerShell as my install. And Ironheart, by the way, is the next Iron Man. She looks like this. And Tony Stark is her AI. You know how Tony Stark has Jeeves or Albert or whatever his name is chattering in his ear, or the Vision, whatever, I forget the guy's name. Ironheart has Tony Stark as her AI. All right, I gotta go get ready for my next meeting, my friends. Is that okay, Dan?